I am on my way to Iceland with a Sony and a Canon camera, and I'm a little bit nervous about the weather. Iceland is traditionally a bit of a weather mystery, and we often get pretty lucky. It's not looking like we're going to get lucky this time. Let's find out together, shall we?
Canon versus Sony, a question as old as time, or at least as old as 2015 to 2016. There are positives and negatives with both systems, and there is one that is probably the most right for you, and I'm going to talk about it in this video.
I've made it to a very windy and misty Iceland. It's not raining yet. Actually, it kind of is. But it's moving horizontally at you. It's a bit of a surreal drive. So I drove out to Blue Lagoon, and there are some volcanoes going off, but there's been volcanoes going off for a few years now. And they've actually sealed off the entirety of Blue Lagoon with their man-made berm to redirect lava flow so it doesn't come in here. So roads just end, and then the road that we would usually take to get to Grindavik is just completely gone. That part's pretty crazy. The road that you've driven down 100, 200 times just doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure it will exist again, but right now it is just volcanic rock. New rocks, I guess. That's the positive. Welcome to my messy hotel room. So what is better, the Canon R5 Mark II, we're not going to do a direct camera body, I'm going to talk about the entire systems, or the Sony A9 Mark III, those are the two cameras, A9 Mark III right here, R5 Mark II here. On the R5 Mark II, the 2870 f2.0. I'm sure there's a decimal place in there eventually. The brand new camera body, and what I think a lot of people consider to be the ultimate wedding photography lens, is 2870 f2. It is a bit large, so I know a lot of people that have purchased it and gone back to the 24-70 f2.8. I like this lens a lot, and for this trip, I am willing to overcome the discomfort that this lens, the heaviness, costs me. It's also expensive. And then this 85mm f1.4 GM2. So as you can see, these two cameras here side by side. Sony is always going to be a little bit smaller in my experience for a similar camera, not including the lens. The lenses we're going to talk about, and the ergonomics in general we're going to talk about throughout this video. But I would just say overall, your Sony kit is probably going to be generally smaller than a Canon kit. And that's something that's important to me, especially for travel. Putting this thing in this Peak Design backpack, it's big. It barely fits in one of the center slides. I guess you can configure the backpack to fit it, but this, much easier to bring with you. And I would say in general, most of the lenses are at least a little bit smaller, if not a lot of bit smaller for the Sony system. Let's go outside, shall we? Or maybe just record in the car because it's just pouring rain. Beautiful day. It's the Osmo Pocket 3 weather sealed. Guess we're gonna find out on this trip. The new goal in this video is to not have to record everything inside the vehicle, but they're giving tourists white interiors now. So that's risky. If you made it this far and you're wondering who I am, I'm Taylor Jackson. I've been a wedding photographer for about 20 years now, and I've photographed over 1,000 weddings all around the world. I also use all the camera brands on this channel, which might seem crazy, but whatever is newest, I'm usually testing it out on real wedding days. Maybe I'm second or third shooting for my wife Lindsay or one of our friends, and I feel like that puts me in a bit of a unique position. I don't know any other photographers that are shooting Canon one weekend, then Nikon the next weekend, then Sony the next weekend. So it's very nice to have that direct comparison, and that's what I'm going to bring to you over this video. And if you're interested, I do have a free 2.5 hour wedding photography course, and it's available. It comes with a free preset pack and my wedding day shot list and a bunch of other free bonuses. Check that out in the description below. You might be wondering, what are we doing in Iceland? Why are we here in the rain? And we are hosting a workshop. So my friend Cole and I are hosting a workshop, and photographers from all over the world, so the States as well as Japan. And I hope that the weather gets better, because Iceland to Japan is a big trip, and I hope that Iceland at least showcases a little bit for the effort. So we're gonna be shooting a lot of different setups that you've already been seeing throughout this video already, and touring around the countryside and just stop. It's kind of elopement style, that if we see something that's interesting, we stop, we shoot it. So there's some good light happening. If there's any light happening, we stop and we take advantage of it in the spot that we're at. And the idea is that everyone goes home with some new portfolio to book more weddings and showcase themselves and basically create the work that they want to exist, because you are usually, as a wedding photographer, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever your couples are booking you for. So it's very easy to get stuck in a loop of shooting the same weddings over and over and over again. And if you have dreams of doing something else, or you have dreams of doing travel weddings, it is important to be creating the portfolio that you want to get booked for. We also have another one of these coming up in Majorca. So if you want to go somewhere where it's warmer, it's in March, you can come there. This Iceland one, you've already missed it. Sorry. Talk a little bit about what Canon cameras I recommend and what Sony cameras I recommend. Sony is kind of in between a release cycle, I would say, at this exact moment of recording. And because of that, I would recommend the Sony A7 IV.
It is an incredible camera at a great price point, and it will do most of the things you need. If you're a hybrid photo video creator, that is actually the reason that I have this here A9 Mark III, because it does 4K 60 with no crop. So when I'm doing my photography coverage, I can just hit the record button and pretty much instantly be recording into 4K 60 video with no crop. And this is a huge thing for me. If I am using the Sony a7 IV and I'm doing hybrid coverage with it, I actually shoot 1080 60p. So there's a crop on the 4K 60 and APS-C crop, which is pretty extreme. So you're taking your pictures 35 millimeters and then you start recording the video and all of a sudden you're at 50 millimeters. You can see how that would be a little not ideal. So my strategy has always just been to shoot everything at HD 60 and upscale it in post. And honestly, I have no complaints with the quality. Everything is in focus. The footage itself is beautiful. And when it's upscaled, it just kind of makes people a little bit happier with themselves, I would say. They're not seeing every individual pore in detail. They want to look good. And if I can do something to facilitate them looking a little bit better, maybe without their knowledge, I feel like they're happier overall. So Sony a7 IV would be my recommendation on the Sony side right now. Or if you want more megapixels, if you're more into landscape photography, the Sony a7R Mark V, but the 4K 60 still comes with a crop there, unfortunately. On the Canon side of things, the R6 Mark II is probably a go-to for most people, even the R6 original. And I mentioned it in my Canon review of the R5 Mark II, is that for photographers, there isn't really a huge jump from the original into the Mark II version. It's just more expensive for a lot of video features you're not gonna need. In the case of the R6 original, one thing to be cautious of if you are shooting in a hot sun environment, that camera does have a tendency to overheat, specifically when shooting video, but I've heard reports in photography modes as well. With the R6 Mark II, they've put proper materials into the camera and it has much better heat dispersions. So if you're shooting that Florida wedding in the sun, you're gonna be in a much better situation. When it comes to hybrid, I have to verify something on Lindsay's camera, so I haven't shot the R6 Mark II a lot, but one of my main issues with the R6 original was that if you are doing photography and you hit the record button, it bumps you into an automatic video mode and you can't set that to a manual video mode. So you can only set a manual video mode on an R5 or an R5 Mark II, or I think any of the cameras basically with a screen. If it has a LCD screen up in the top, you can set your C3 mode and then you can set that to manual video. And when you hit the record button when you're in photo mode, it launches you into manual video. So that is awesome. For the R6 Mark II, I don't believe, and there's a big thing on the screen right now if I checked it and it actually does work, but I don't believe it does. So that is a bit of a bummer for me personally. And a reason that if I was going the Canon side of things, I would probably be going R5 or R5 Mark II, or even an R3 if you get a good deal on one. The R3 is awesome, the R5 is awesome, the R5 Mark II for hybrid photo video creators, or if you're just on the photography side of things, the R6 or the R6 II is probably the way to go. I guess we drive back to Reykjavik. Just got a message that says the weather is nice there now. I've now dropped the car off at the domestic airport in Reykjavik City, and it's a 3-kilometer walk back to my hotel, or if I see a scooter, we're probably gonna go for a scooter. Let me take this as an opportunity to talk to you about the image quality of the Sony versus Canon. I would be very hard pressed to be able to tell images apart really from any current release camera with current release lenses. Yeah, if you're using older lenses or using something that's maybe not meant for professional use, you might see some errors, but otherwise, I'm going to say that the image quality you're going to get from any combination of current lenses and camera body, it's going to be pretty amazing. Now it's time to scooter. I don't really have a mount to facilitate this for you, but there it is, the scooter. Beautiful. All right, let's talk natural light versus strobe. So here at Iceland, we're using natural light pretty much primarily, maybe strobe for 1 or 2 photos throughout the day. I find myself using, I would say, now that the high ISO capabilities of all these cameras are so darn good, I find myself maybe using flash for, I'm gonna say less than 3% of the day usually. And this is usually when the quality of light isn't good. So that means that it can get candlelit as long as everybody's evenly balanced and their faces all look good. I'm happy to shoot ambient, but as soon as I need to clean up the light a little bit, that's usually when I bring in flash. There are other creative ways you can bring it in, or just to make the quality of light even better than it actually is. There are options. I find myself gravitating a little bit more towards natural light. There are some benefits specifically of the Sony a9 III, which is global shutter, and that means that the entire sensor is reading it all at once, so you have some more capabilities when it comes to flash. I personally have had the a9 III for a while now, and I haven't really used the full capabilities of the camera when it comes to flash. The cool thing is that you, for the most part, I'm gonna put an asterisk here, go more in depth into this if you are interested in using off-camera flash, and especially using multiple off-camera flashes, because there are some tricks with ramp up powers and whatnot. And the fun thing is,
You now don't really have to worry too much about sync speed, but I only really use flash inside. I don't use it creatively a whole lot. So if you're looking at using flash creatively, head on over and check out Jason Vincent, his channel. He has some incredible flash. Actually, he's 3 or 4 videos on this channel here that talk about his off-camera flash usage, and an A9 III in his hands is a far more capable device for flash than in my hands. If you are in one of the newer Sony bodies, the A7R Mark V or the A9 III, or even the A7 IV, the ergonomics are great. I have no complaints really. The A9 III is by far my favorite ergonomic camera, but it's probably not something that I would immediately recommend to you. When it comes to any of the Canon bodies, they feel a little chunkier in your hand, if that makes any sense. And in terms of button layouts, I'm quite happy with both. And here's a live cat footage. And there are a few things that I will change in terms of ergonomics and in terms of button layout, I guess. One thing that I will add is an APS-C crop button. On Sony, it's nice because you can set it to just one button and you press it and it goes into APS-C crop mode. You press it again, it comes out. When it comes to Canon, it's still a press and you have to go through the menu and select which one you want. Not a big deal. Wish Canon would implement it, make my life a little bit happier. And then copyright Jason Vincent, as of this year, he really wants Sony to implement that press and hold. So as you're holding it, you would be in APS-C crop mode, and as soon as you let go of it, you go back to full frame mode so you don't forget that you're accidentally in APS-C. Other things I change on the top of my Sony camera, I will change the back dial so that you get 2 dials in the back on the newer cameras, and I will change one of them to be ISO, and it's really, really nice. I use my camera in full manual pretty much all the time because I'm doing photo and video coverage, so I lock everything down. And when it comes to Canon, I actually leave pretty much everything the same. For the back big wheel being my aperture, the back dial being my ISO, which is maybe a bit surprising. So I will leave aperture on the least ergonomic of all the dials. And other than that, I really don't change a whole lot on my Canon cameras. Now, one difference when it comes to the screen. So the screen of the A9 III and the A7R Mark V is amazing. It is both a tilt and also a fully articulating screen, which is my favorite combination of ingredients. Here's my boy. And what that means is that you basically get the best of both worlds. And it's not a fully articulating. If you want to just be a tilt screen, it can be. And I find that very, very, very useful. I use my screen, I would say 99.94% of the time on a wedding day. Maybe if it's a very backlit image, and maybe I guess I'll put an asterisk here. Sony's screens, the LCDs, are not good. I don't know why they don't put good screens in them, but they do not. Canon, the screens are amazing, and I will be very happy to use that screen in a bright environment. Whereas Sony, you can kind of trust the camera. You know, we're going to talk about autofocus next. You know the camera's going to put the image in focus, but sometimes you just can't see exactly what you're doing. All right, now let's talk autofocus. They're both amazing. Any current camera is going to be incredible. Even going back to the R6, I'm very, very, very happy with it. Side by side, I'm going to give the edge here to Sony, especially with the A9 III. It's very, very fast. It predicts exactly what I want it to be doing, and it's really just a dream to use. When it comes to Canon, one of the big updates was for autofocus. So now on the Canon R5 Mark II, the autofocus is a lot better, but a lot of the upgrades on the R5 Mark II were actually in the video department. So if you're just here for photography, maybe that doesn't matter to you at all, and the R5 is probably a better choice. When it comes to low light focus performance and just using the camera in low light in general in terms of high ISO, I really had no issues. I think Sony again gets a bit of the edge here, but it's very, very marginal. I think one of the other advancements in the R5 Mark II was for low light autofocus performance and low light functionality like high ISO. For myself, I was very, very happy with the original, so no complaints. And also just shoot the correct lens for the spot you're in. If you're in a dark environment and there's no light at all, just go in an 85 1.8 rather than trying to use a 24-70 f4 or something like that in the wrong environment. That will help you keep your ISO down, and you'll never end up in a situation where you need to crank your ISO higher than you're capable of. Now let's talk about maybe the most controversial part of camera comparisons, the color science. So you've been seeing the images, and side by side with my preset, you probably can't even really tell which is from which camera. I will say that the images straight at camera do have a certain look, especially the pressed JPEGs that come off the camera, and maybe you'll be able to tell in a side-by-side comparison then, but if you do have full control over it and you have fine-tuned a preset to make it your color science, then the camera is shooting your color science essentially, so there's no reason for this to be a real problem and a comparison any longer. So overall, I don't think that it's a big reason. I think that some lenses also will add a certain color element. Older Sony lenses will absolutely add an element of green, but it's not something that is uncolor correctable. And I will actually say, even though Nikon's not part of this comparison, Nikon files are way easier to work with than Sony and Canon. I would put them 2 and 2, both tied. Nikon the best again, just by a marginal amount, and then Sony and Canon down below. And specifically in mixed lighting environments, so if you just have to shoot in something that's just a really weird lighting environment, I find it a little bit easier to clean up Nikon files, whereas Sony and Canon just takes me a couple seconds longer. But if you're using an AI editing solution like Imagine, link down below, 1500 free edits if you're interested. It's what I use for all of my full-length wedding galleries. It'll just do all the color for you, and it'll just give you your final images back, and it'll also match all your color between cameras. So if you are someone that's crazy enough to shoot a Canon R5 Mark II and a Sony A9 III at a wedding, it'll just fix that and make it all look nice and cohesive. Another space where there is no clear winner is battery life. I'm very happy with the battery performance of both these cameras. I will use, if you're reading from the charts, there's a CIPA rating, and it's always wildly inaccurate. It'll gauge it at something like 300 photos per battery, and it'll actually be somewhere maybe in the 3000 mark. So it's not even a little bit off, it's like 10 times off. And especially, so I guess the way I use my cameras, or my mirrorless cameras, is I'll actually turn them off. So I'll take pictures, I'll do what I need to do, and then I will pretty much immediately turn the camera off rather than just leaving it idling. And I think this maybe helps save battery life, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe the startup and shutdown process is actually more battery intensive. Either way, I can probably get away. I think the Sony A7 IV, I did something like 4,500 images on one single battery. So you're able to do that. So if you're reading the ratings, just don't stress out about them because they're not right. Now, one area or one department that Canon, at least natively, excels in is creating very unique lenses like the 24 to 105 f2 consistent, and it's an internal zoom, and it's a really nice lens, but it's gigantic. And then the 28 to 70 f2 that we have here, that is considered to be the ultimate wedding lens. They don't have the Tamron 35 to 150, which is a lens that I love to use, as well as the Sigma 85 1.4, or the Tamron 28 to 75 f2.8 G2, which is another incredible lens at an insane price point for how good that lens is. So side by side, I would rank that 28 to 75 f2.8 up there with the Canon L 24 to 70 f2.8. Sure, you're not getting the 4 millimeters additional on the wide end, but you're saving, I think, over $1,000, which is nuts. So shout out to Canon for doing some unique things with their lenses, but hopefully third-party lenses available soon, because right now Sony is winning the lens battle for sure. Sony also has 1.4 lenses as well, which is very important to me. I feel like a 1.4 is the correct balance of weight and cost versus image quality, and I'm gonna say weight and size is actually more important to me because I only bring one camera bag with me. I bring my everyday messenger from Peak Design, and that is the only bag that I'll bring with me for wedding days. So I do want that bag to be lightweight and not weigh me down, which is another reason why, even though f1.2 lenses exist, I don't tend to find myself gravitating towards them. If I was a photographer like my friend Liam that shoots 50 millimeters pretty much all day, I would be very happy to go with the 1.2, knowing that that's going to be the lens that I use for 90% of the day. For myself, I am kind of a mix between the 35, the 85, and the 35 to 150. So using all of those lenses all day, it doesn't make sense for me to go for a more expensive and also significantly heavier version of that lens when I can get something a little bit smaller and more cost effective. Unfortunately, I guess there's one 1.4 lens for Canon 35. It's pretty good. I'm hoping for more, maybe a 50, maybe a 24. I feel like the 24 is what everyone wants. They want a professional 24, and then a 50 and 85 and 1.4s. And I feel like a lot of us would be very happy with Canon. So primes versus zooms, another controversial topic. I feel like both are fine now. I feel like if you're listening to any of the old photo.net posts or something that's just from the history of photography, yeah, zooms didn't really keep up as well back in the film days. Now I would say primes versus zooms. A zoom is going to give you just as nice images most of the time, as long as you get a good one, you've done your research, but it's going to give you as good of image quality as a prime lens. The only thing you're not going to get from a zoom that you're going to get from a prime is if you like to shoot with a really, really shallow depth of field. So I find myself shooting lenses pretty much wide open all the time. So that means I'm at f1.4 or 1.2 or 1.8 pretty much all day. That is an aesthetic that I like, and that is one of the reasons that I choose prime lenses. And then the other reason is for the size factor, that it's just a smaller physical footprint and easier to put in my bag for the day, and just a little bit more ergonomic for me to carry throughout the day. One other thing you might notice is that I don't really use filters a whole lot. For doing hybrid photo video coverage, it's a little challenging to use an ND filter. What an ND is just sunglasses for your camera. It makes a little less light come into the lens, so you can slow your shutter speed down to something that's officially appropriate. Theoretically, you're supposed to be shooting the 180 rule, rule, so you're supposed to be at 180 shutter, which means you should be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting 60 frames per second, you should be at 120 of a shutter, so 1/120. I don't really do that. I don't notice glitchiness. I don't have an ND on this right now, and the shutter speed is probably 1/500th of a second. And I'm walking, which I will not do on a wedding day. So on a wedding day, I will be perfectly still. I will frame my image, the image that I want to capture or the video that I want to capture. I will frame it and I will let the motion happen within it. I'm not chasing people around. I'm not trying to be a steady cam. If I am doing that, I will ND and I will do things properly. But for just that motion, I feel like the slow motion, shooting at 60p and delivering at 24 also hides a little bit of it. And then if you do notice it and it's really glitchy, like if, I don't know, if I move around really fast here, you're probably noticing that it's just rolling shutter. But there's probably some sort of, you can see the choppiness because the shutter speed is too high. And if I do notice that, I will use a plugin called Real Smart Motion Blur, and you just drag it on the clips, or you can drag it on the entire project if you want. And it will emulate motion blur as though you shot it properly at the 180 rule. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's really challenging to stay at the correct shutter speed for video and also be doing photography. So if you're at 1/120 of a second and something's moving really fast, or it's the bokeh toss, or something just doesn't agree with that shutter speed, or it's going to force you to stop down all the way to f8 or f11 in order to make that shutter speed work in that frame, I would much rather just fix it in post a little bit, not a whole lot. I know the limitations of it, and I know when I can't use it, but I do overcrank shutter speed, which probably makes a lot of the video people pretty upset watching this. Sorry about that. In terms of other filters, I have none in my bag. I've used a circular polarizer from time to time, and one of the benefits of it is if you do have, I guess if you know that everybody's bald, going to the wedding, you're like, there's a lot of bald people and we have hot sun and we're in a farm and there's no trees. In that case, bring a circular polarizer. Take some of that glare down on some people's heads. Or you can make the sky a little bit darker. I personally find that it kind of makes it feel a little bit unnatural for images. I use them for landscape photography sparingly, but in terms of wedding days, I feel like there's no use, at least in my mind. And the last filter I'll talk about is a mist filter. I've shot I feel like a lot of the videos that I do on my 20mm lens on the channel here. So if it's a wider lens or if it's a studio shot, I usually have a 1/4 black mist filter on there, and it's basically because I have bad skin and it kind of hides it a little bit. It doesn't quite do a retouch on you, but it definitely softens things that I am happy to have softened a little bit. For wedding days, I don't use one at all typically. And then what I'll actually do is I will do the skin softening in post-production. So I'll just use a plugin in Lightroom and I'll actually go through my process. Is pretty simple. So I'll send my images to Imagine through Lightroom. They'll come back with all the final edits, and I will export from there, and I will actually do a 98% squeeze. So I squeeze all my images, the width by 2%. So everyone looks a little skinnier and they're a little bit happier with themselves. And then I will actually do skin smoothing on top of that as well. So I'll use a plugin called Portraiture. I believe it's by a company called Ergonomics. There's lots of other options. Lightroom does this built in now. So if you haven't already purchased that plugin, just use the Lightroom adaptive AI, and they're probably gonna be pretty good, pretty close to the same. So find a mix that works for you, that's not too intense, that people don't feel like they've been retouched, and they're just gonna like their pictures more, and they're gonna be happier with their overall gallery because of it. So Canon versus Sony, which images did you prefer? And overall, what setup do you prefer? I'm hesitant to give a recommendation that you should just sell everything and go with one brand. I will say if you're already in the Canon lineup and you have some EF glass that you're gonna adapt, it makes a lot more sense to stay with them because the differences are so marginal. If you're watching this video right now and you don't have any camera equipment, I would probably say that the edge goes to Sony right now. And overall, all things considered, I would say that it's a better system and a more cost-effective system for you to buy into right now. But it does come down to your specific use case and what you'll be using this for outside of weddings, or if you're doing wedding photo and video coverage, some more variables come into play. So hopefully the information is here to help you make a more educated decision. These are some of the reasons that I go with the gear that I go with, and hopefully this helps a little bit. Again, 2.5-hour wedding photography course down below if you're interested. Free preset pack comes with that, my wedding day shot list, and a whole lot more. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Go hang out with my friends over here. What's up, boys?